very good to be with you all. Very warm welcome. I hope everybody feels welcome in this community. That's our intention. Whoever you are, that you can show up as you are, and meet together in community, which the Buddha said is all of the spiritual path is spiritual friends, spiritual friendship, spiritual community. We don't wake up just on our own. So very warm welcome to everyone. And if you're new, hi Cindy, good to see you. If you're new, maybe you just want to put down and say hi in the chat, and we'll warmly welcome you. And and welcome back everyone who's regulars or occasionally comes along. So I'm Hugh Byrne. I'm been teaching this class for over 20 years now on a Sunday morning, and we've kind of changed it a little bit in the last year or so. I pretty much taught all of the classes until really almost the end of 2022, and found that with a lot of other things that I'm doing, I found it worked better to teach about twice a month. And as many of you know, Regina Flanagan has been playing a very central role as well in teaching, typically once a month. And we have guest teachers or Sangha-led sessions about once a month as well. So normally I will teach. Make sure you mute yourself if you're normally I teach the first and third Sundays of the month, just so you know if that's important to you. But sometimes it changes. Like this month, I was traveling to London, over to Europe, and so a bit different this month, but typically the first and third Sundays. So with that, welcome to you all. The theme of the session today, I think what I called it was coming home. I think I called it something like our journey to freedom, and going to be looking at some supports for our practice and for helping us really make the journey from suffering to freedom, which is kind of at the heart of all of the Buddha's teachings, to get out of entanglement and to live with peace, with ease, with greater freedom. So we, just in terms of the format of the session, we typically begin with a meditation, somewhere in the region of about 20 minutes. Then I share a talk, kind of reflection on the teachings, which is normally around 25 or 30 minutes or so. Then we have a period of mindful movement. Kirsten is going to be leading today. Most weeks Emily leads, but she's got a family commitment out of town. And then we'll have some time for sharing, for folks share things that have come up for them, raise questions if you have any, and we typically finish at 12 noon so that everyone who wants to can get on with their day and get on with the weekend. But continue a little bit afterwards for anyone who wants to stay around. At times we'll do small group sharing. Other times it might be just in the full group. Typically about half of the folks stay around for that. So if that's something, if you have the time to do that, that can be a time for kind of digging in a little bit more, perhaps connecting with others in a more more informal way afterwards, just talking about the practices, talking about your own experience. So you're very welcome to join us. I think I'm plan to stay around for at least a while after 12 today for those who want to stay. So with that, we'll begin with a meditation, and as an introduction. As an introduction to the meditation, just to say that that the meditation is really an opportunity to use a phrase from Thich Nhat Hanh, to keep our appointment with life. Keep our appointment with life. We're so often somewhere else. Our bodies are here and our minds are in the future, worrying, thinking about the past, caught up often in some mental stories and narratives in our mind about, what should be happening and what we don't like and all of that, caught up in impulses. And coming into stillness is a way of just coming home to ourselves. In a way, we might say all of our practice is coming home, coming home to ourselves, coming home to our experience, coming home to our lives. So with that, just to invite you to come into a posture that is comfortable and relaxed, whatever posture works for you. If you feel more comfortable lying down, obviously feel free to do that. If you feel more comfortable listening and walking and doing a walking meditation, that's perfectly fine too. Probably the majority of us will be sitting. And if you're sitting, just find a comfortable posture. Let your back be straight. Invite the shoulders to relax. You might let your hands rest comfortably in your lap or on your knees or on your thighs. And if you're comfortable in doing it, you might let your eyes gently close. Let your attention come inward. So much of our focus is on what's going on around us and outside of us. Just inviting the attention inward into the body, inviting the attention to drop out of the top few inches of our body, the head, the brain, down into the body. Feel the contact of your body with the surface beneath it, the chair or the cushion, or your feet with the floor. See if you can feel the sensations from the inside. It might be warmth or hardness, softness, pressure, tingling, pulsing. Just opening to whatever is present. Letting yourself be here as fully as you can right now. And you might find it helpful to take a few longer, deeper breaths to help you settle, if that's useful to you. Take a nice, full, deep in-breath, filling the chest, filling the lungs. Just pausing briefly and then just releasing, letting go on the out-breath. Breathing in, calming the body. And breathing out, calming the mind. Feeling the body as the breath comes in, that energizes the body, and then the relaxation, the release of the out-breath, letting go of anything you might be holding. Just imagine you're breathing it out, any tension, any stresses, worries. And there's another way of helping you settle and arrive and be here as fully as you can. You might consciously invite a smile to your face. Maybe thinking of something or somebody that makes you feel happy or joyful or grateful. Taking in a feeling of warmth or joy or connection as you breathe in and as you breathe out. If it's an individual that comes to mind, just holding them in your awareness and in your heart. And as a way of connecting with yourself and your feelings, your experience. If it's helpful, you might just put a hand on your heart, maybe the other hand on your belly. Just feeling this life here, this body breathing. Maybe feeling a sense of caring for this life, for yourself. Kindness, care. Life can be challenging at times, stressful, sometimes difficult. Just having a way of coming home to ourselves, caring about this life, this being, it's you. Buddha is supposed to have said, you could travel all around the world and not find anyone more deserving of your kindness than yourself. Letting yourself just rest in being here. Letting your breathing settle into its natural rhythm. Just open your awareness to whatever is present right now. Just notice what's predominant in your awareness. Maybe there's some bodily feeling that's maybe a bit uncomfortable or maybe pleasant. See if you can make space for whatever is here right now. You might open to whatever mood or emotion might be noticeable, if there's anything that you notice right now. Maybe there's some heaviness, tiredness, or maybe there's some energy, some lightness, calmness, joy. or worry, whatever is here, see if you can just let your awareness hold what's here. Let it come, let it be, and let it go when it's ready to go. A poem I often come back to is Martha Postlethwaite's Clearing. She says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours, alone to sing, falls into your open, cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." So we could think of this period of meditation as creating a clearing in the dense forest of our lives, in the busyness and the activities, and just coming into stillness, quietness, and opening to whatever is present. And it may be that out of the stillness, out of the quiet, in the silence, may come some understanding, some clarity or insight about ourselves, about our life, that we can then go back into our lives, into the world, so worthy of rescue. If it's helpful, you might just let your attention rest on the body breathing, experience of the in-breath and the out-breath, just as it is. And the breath can be an anchor for us, kind of helping ground us here now. And when the mind moves into thought, maybe into stories or plans or memories, you can just gently, kindly come back to the body, come back to the breath, come back home, here now. when you do find yourself caught up in some story or some mind state or emotion, see if you can just meet that with kindness. Appreciate that recognition that you've been off somewhere, that's a moment of presence, a moment of waking up. And we can just keep coming back, beginning again, coming home. And the more we keep coming back, the more being present becomes the default, rather than just being a place we visit occasionally. This breath, this feeling, this moment. finish with this poem by Antonio Machado. In English, it's called Walker. Walker, your footsteps are the road and nothing more. Walker, there is no road. The road is made by walking. Walking, you make the road. And turning to look behind, you see the path you never again will step upon. Walker, there is no road, only foam trails on the sea. So take your time coming back, opening your eyes, coming back into the group, kind of more outwardly oriented. Welcome everyone, and anyone who joined us during the meditation. A warm welcome, a warm welcome to you and everyone. In the talk today, I'd like to focus on, particularly on a poem by the beloved poet Mary Oliver, her poem "The Journey," and really explore that poem through the lens of the Buddha's teachings. Just as a kind of a little bit of a background, in recent sessions over recent months, I've been focusing very much on the Buddha's teachings of awakening. The potential for experiencing freedom in this lifetime. That our practice really is about being able to live our life in a different way, so that we're not burdened, as it were, by life. We're not, stressed out by all the things we have to do, or annoyed by the people who are rubbing us the wrong way, and all of that, frustrated by all the things that we think we should have but we don't have, and those, and the many forms of suffering that we experience, of difficulty, unpleasantness, life not being the way we want it to be. And the Buddha's teachings are really about being able to live a different kind of life in the midst of life and connected with everyone we're connected with, but experiencing it in a wholly different way, with a different sensibility, if you like, without clinging, without attachment to, I want things to be the way I want them to be, and I want the things I don't like to be gone. So all of this really, I've been speaking about that. If you to encapsulate it, I could say that all of the Buddha's teachings are focused on the journey from suffering to freedom. Almost all of us, I'd say, probably all of us here, and almost everybody experiences life in a less than complete way, a less than fully enlightened way, and the teachings are really about pointing the way to how we can free ourselves from the kind of entanglements and confusion and kind of stuckness that we can find ourselves enmeshed in and caught up in. I've spoken quite a bit about that. And all of the Buddha's teachings were really for the purpose of helping beings, obviously beings in, people who were living around northern India at the time he was alive, but obviously concerned that those teachings come down through time, to help other beings, and solely for the purpose of, for compassion, for caring about suffering, seeing suffering around us, just as we see people suffering. If we see people who are homeless or people who are lacking in food or basic necessities, I think the natural response of the heart is to care and to do something that we can do anything we can to, if we haven't shut down that faculty of compassion, to really be responsive. And that's really where the Buddha's own teachings come from. And the Buddha's own search for the end of suffering and his realization, his realization that there is an end to suffering, really his enlightenment, is really an archetypal story of this journey from suffering to freedom. He taught that we all have the capacity to awaken from suffering. It wasn't just something about him personally, that isn't available to all of us. We all have the capacity to wake up to a deep freedom that is available, that is truly available to all of us. And he taught a path he called the Noble Eightfold Path. Noble because it leads to deep freedom, a path of training. And I've been speaking in recent times, including the last session a couple of weeks ago, how really the present moment and our relationship to the present moment is really at the heart of, is really the doorway to freedom from suffering. How am I meeting this moment? This one right now, the one where I'm saying this one right now, and the one that you're listening, and whatever else is going on. How am I? How are you? How are we meeting this moment? And that's really the kind of the fork in the road. How we meet this moment will determine our future happiness or our future suffering. If we meet this moment with resistance, with anger, or this shouldn't be like this, and we're struggling with I don't like this, I don't want this, then we're creating the conditions for further suffering. We're creating, the conditions for more resistance, more anger, more, pushing away of experience. But if we meet this moment in the way that we do when we practice meditation, so, okay, can I welcome, can I open to this moment? Can I be present with this? Then we're creating the conditions for greater freedom in the future. Just this, if you like, every moment is like a fork in the road. Do I go this way or do I go this way? Do I go to suffering or do I go to greater freedom? And all of the teachings, particularly the teachings of, the Four Noble Truths about suffering, the existence of suffering and why we suffer, because in some way we're in a relationship of resistance to life, resistance to how things are, wanting them to be different, not wanting them to be the way they are. And that the Buddha spoke about as craving or clinging, that we're holding on. And that holding on is really the cause of suffering, he said. And that we can let go, that when we see that that's causing us suffering, like holding on to a rope and burning our hands, or holding on to a lump of coal and getting burned, we drop. The first thing we want to do is we drop it. We stop doing the thing that keeps causing us suffering. But we've got to we got to see clearly in order to do that. Otherwise, we just keep in that cycle. Probably we're all familiar with that. We keep doing things that don't actually serve us. Anyone experience that? I know I have. Just keep on that cycle. It's on the treadmill. You've set something in motion, and it's very hard. It can be very hard to get off. There can be something very enticing, very comfortable in our suffering. We're used to it. The relationships where we get in arguments with people and we push each other's buttons, but we can't seem to resist doing those things. And in order to be able to move in a different direction, we've got to be willing to be present with our suffering, to be present with the difficulties, to see clearly what we're doing that isn't serving us, and let go of that clinging. And then that's the path to freedom. And the Buddha then spoke about the kind of in a more detailed way about that path of, living wisely and compassionately, wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood, training the mind through meditation, wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration, and cultivating wisdom, wise understanding. How do we see things in a big way, and how do we cultivate the intentions to move in a more wholesome direction? So all of the teachings are designed to kind of take us on this journey from suffering to freedom. Sometimes the teachings are framed that it's not really a journey at all because we're already here. We don't need to do anything or get somewhere because we're already here. We're already free. A lot of teachings about we're already free. But you can still see it as a journey to the realization that we're already free, because for most of us, we're not actually living as though we really knew that we were already free. We might know it maybe in a conceptual way, but in a deeper experiential way, we don't tend to know, and we don't tend to act as though we know, oh, freedom is here right now. So it's a journey there to that. It's maybe not to somewhere else, but it's a journey to realization. And, I was thinking about the different, what is it that helps us to see clearly? What is it that helps us to let go? What is it that helps us to gain insight that is freeing? The seeing clearly that frees us from suffering. And ultimately, it has to come through our own experience. Nobody can say, some magic words and then you wake up, then you're free from suffering. Nobody can do it for you, as a gift. Oh, I'm going to free you from suffering. Maybe in some traditions that's the case, but in the Buddha's Buddha's teachings that it has to, and I think we know it from our experience, it has to come from within. It has to come from our own seeing clearly, our own understanding, and our own letting go. Teachings can be very, very helpful, and teachers can be helpful, but really just to point the way. That in Zen teachings, they often use the metaphor of the finger pointing at the moon. It's so good to have the finger pointing at the moon if you don't know where the moon is. Where's the moon? Oh, it's right there. The finger points at the moon. But people mistake the finger for the moon. They think that the one who's pointing is the answer rather than the thing that's being pointed to. I think of it as well as, eating the menu rather than the meal. The menu points to what the meal could give you, and the enjoyment that you could get from the meal. But the menu isn't going to be very nutritious, is it? It might give you indigestion or some other thing. So I think that's a good metaphor for how we get, we can get confused in thinking that the thing that's the pointer. I mean, fundamentalism is that, isn't it? In any tradition, fundamentalism is eating the menu. the teachings of almost all traditions have something really wise and compassionate and useful. But people think it's not about that. It's about this book. What did this book say? And this line and all of that. And then it becomes, it becomes a form of idolatry. We're worshipping false idols, as in the Bible, Christian Jewish Bible, the ancient, those teachings of the Bible. But all that to say that teachings and teachers can point the way. Stories are wonderful in helping us to see things more clearly. I mean, the story of the Buddha's awakening of his journey is, I find, a very inspiring story. Of like this going from illusion, living in wealth and comfort and luxury and thinking that was where happiness lay. But then coming to the understanding that there must be more to life than this. And then embarking on the search, studying and practicing austerity and all of these methods of seeing if he could find the end to suffering, encountering all the obstacles on the way. And then through his own practice and through his own clarity, being able to find freedom from suffering. That's I think a wonderful kind of story that can help inspire us in our own practice. I think images and metaphors can be really helpful. In the Buddhist tradition, you probably heard the story of, the raft. How do you, the Buddha talked about, if you wanted to get across a river, you would, you could use a raft to get you across the river. And this is a metaphor for teachings that help you on the river. But once you get across the river, he asked his followers, do you carry the raft on your shoulders everywhere you go? And they said, no, you wouldn't do that. In the same way, you don't carry, the burden of anything, even the teachings on your shoulder. You use them to get across the river, get across from suffering to freedom. And the Buddha, so that image of the raft, the image of a lamp, the Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourselves. Trust in your own capacity to wake up. And the metaphor of the arrows, the first arrow is just the pain that will come in life. The second arrow, that is the resistance to the difficulty, the resistance to what we're experiencing. The second arrow is what is optional, is unnecessary, and we can let go. We can let go of the second arrow. All of these are, I think, really helpful metaphors, images that can help us in our practice. And what I want to look at today, though, is the role that of poetry as, it's another form of, can be another form of telling a story, and I find myself that poetry can be really helpful, and I use it, I bring poems into talks and into meditations. I think for three main reasons. One, to help bring us back to the present moment. You think of, the lines from, Rumi's The Guest House, welcome the guests, and inviting that welcoming, that image can be quite helpful, I think. So, bringing us back to the present moment. Mary Oliver's line at the end of the summer day, after walking through the fields all day, she says, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So whenever I hear that or think of that, I think of, okay, what is it I'm doing with my life, with this wild and precious life? It kind of brings me back in a very clear way, and maybe hopefully for others as well. That poem I shared from Martha Postlethwaite of the clearing called Clearing. Creating a clearing in the dense forest of our lives. That sense of, why are we doing this? And what are we doing when we're coming into stillness, coming into silence and quietness? I think of Wendell Berry's The Peace of Wild Things, where he says, I rest in the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I love that line, taxing our lives with forethought of grief. We're creating problems in the future for the present. And we suffer when we do that. So rather than that, rest in the peace of wild things. And he says, he ends it, for a time I rest in the peace in the grace of the world and am free. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So I think these poetry can bring us back into the present moment. It can help too in providing insights. I think a metaphor can be an insight for us. Oh yeah, guests. I could welcome those guests, or I could rest in the peace of wild things. They're things that can help us remember, help us open our minds, open our hearts. And that's the third thing, to help us open our hearts, help us. I shared a poem, maybe I'll share it later, in the poem from Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi about, I used to, what's the word for it? There was a time I would reject those who are not of my faith. Maybe I'll finish up with that later. But I find that poetry can be very helpful. And I want, in the time we have today, I want to just focus on a poem by Mary Oliver, very celebrated poem of hers. And I'll share it, and I'll just kind of walk through it. And from a standpoint of the teachings of the Dharma, of the Buddha's teachings. And it begins, it's the poem, The Journey, and it begins, one day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. You might just kind of listen to it as a meditation, shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its... Could you make sure that you're muted? Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice that you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. So just kind of explore that. I don't know how it lands for you, but kind of for me, it really is a kind of a teaching in itself, just to take in that sense of the journey. And I'm just going to walk through, my own kind of understanding and interpretation and looking at it through the lens of these teachings of the Buddha. She begins by saying, one day you finally knew what you had to do. And for me, these opening two lines our practices, our habits, our ways of living aren't working for us. Maybe they never worked for us, but we didn't realize it. But now there is that realization. It begins there. It's a nice place to begin. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. We don't know what the specifics are about what went on before, what were the difficulties, what were the challenges, except what we can learn from the lines that follow. But most of us, probably all of us, are quite familiar with coming to a time and a place in our life where there's a realization, a recognition that things have to change. We all have our unique and individual versions, perhaps, of that story in our lives. But I think the underlying pattern is a familiar one. Some version of things aren't working, I need to make a change. Can you think of some time in your life where you've had that kind of recognition? Something isn't working here, or things aren't working here. I need to make a change. Maybe we've heard that inner voice and we say, yeah, but it's too hard. It's too difficult. I need whatever it is that this relationship or this situation gives me, even though it may not make me happy. I have to stay. And maybe sometimes we do, because sometimes we may not have an alternative. But just that recognition, I think that's a very powerful beginning, because that's really a recognition, in the Buddhist teachings, would be a recognition of suffering. This is suffering. Things aren't working here. The realization in the poem comes in the midst of past and current challenges. The voices shouting their bad advice, the house trembling. I think of that as trembling with the implications of the change that we're going to make. Maybe people feeling challenged, family, friends, or colleagues, when we're making a change. Makes them feel uncomfortable. Maybe they feel, who would they be if we make this change? Or maybe the change we're making, puts a mirror up for them and makes them feel uncomfortable. Maybe we felt that in relation to other people, when they make change. And there's the resistance to the of others to the change. The old tug at your ankles. Don't leave, don't change, don't leave me, don't change. Mend my life, each voice cries, the poem goes. I hear this as a demand that we work not just on our own suffering and our own tangles, but that we solve the problems of those, maybe it's our family, or maybe loved ones or friends, those around us. But in the midst of all these voices, these demands that we not change, that we mend others' lives, the poet Mary Oliver says, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Even while the change that you're making feels maybe like an earthquake, she says, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. Nonetheless, there's a clarity. There's a clarity. You didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. And then she goes on. So here in that knowing what you have to do, there's this fundamental intention. And intention is at the very heart of our practice. If we don't have intention, we can't really know where we're going. Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. We will. We need to know where we're going. And in the poem, it's not necessarily knowing where we're going so much as knowing that we have to go, that we have to embark on a journey from, what isn't working for us. the renowned Zen teacher of the 20th century Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "The most important thing is to remember the most important thing. The most important thing is to remember the most important thing." I understand this as a reminder of how important it is to know what matters most to us, to connect with what we care about most deeply, and to follow our deepest intentions. So, just maybe pausing for a moment and invite you to reflect on, what are your deepest intentions, in your life, in your practice? What is it that you want? What is it that you wish for? Maybe that's different from what you have, or, where is it that you see yourself going? And just open to whatever, if anything, comes up. Meet it with kindness and with care, with acceptance. So intention. So the poem emphasizes this clarity and the intention to move forward in a new direction. But when we do move out of a situation of suffering and difficulty and entanglement, the path forward is rarely an easy one. So Mary Oliver speaks of the challenges on the path. She says, "It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones." They're kind of a lovely metaphor for the difficulties that are there, the stones and the branches and the stormy night. Doesn't feel like, the ideal kind of conditions where we'd have a nice open road and everything would be smooth, but it doesn't tend to happen that way. So, but as you move forward, and this points to effort and perseverance, which are very much at the heart of our practice, of going forward even where it's difficult, staying with the difficult emotions and mind states. She says, "Little by little, as you left their voices behind, leaving those old habits, those old voices, that old conditioning, letting go of the gravitational pull of the past entanglements and habits and conditioning. As you do that, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, which I think is a lovely metaphor for clarity and insight, moving from confusion, clouded, the clouds, blocking the view and the clarity, and moving towards, moving from confusion and doubt and uncertainty towards a deeper knowing, really knowing that you're on the right path, that you're going in the right direction, that you've made the right decision. So coming out of the entanglements, out of the suffering, the difficulties, the challenges on the way, the intention, the determination, all of this is very much at the heart of these teachings of the Dharma. And as you move forward, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there's a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own. That inner voice, that inner knowing, what Ajahn Chah, the great Thai teacher, spoke of as the one who knows. That inner knowing, that inner clarity, that sometimes maybe we maybe don't connect with that inner voice often enough, but it is there. The Quakers talk about it as of that of God within us. That the inner knowing. So that a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company, that leads you forward really into a new life as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the sliding deeper and deeper into the world. So it's not a journey away from the world or a pulling back from life and from others, but it's really engaging from a new standpoint, a new vantage point, with a new understanding. It brings to mind, for me, the lines at the end of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, where he says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." To arrive where we started. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. We come back to where we started, but we've come back to know it in a different way, to know our lives in a different way, to know our life in a different way. And then the final lines of resolution: determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. And as I understand it, the only thing you could do is really the right thing. It's right action. It's knowing what leads to freedom rather than to suffering. And the recognition that the only life you could save, the only life any of us can save, is our own. The only life any of us can save is our own. We can't ultimately control the lives of anyone, even those we hold most dear. Their life ultimately depends on their own actions and their own choices. We know this. Maybe quite a few of us have maybe learned it the hard way, with our children and, wanting them to deal with life in different ways. But ultimately, the choice will be their own. There's a phrasing, a term reflection in the practice of equanimity that goes, your happiness and suffering depend on your actions and not on my wishes for you. Your happiness and suffering depend on your actions and not on my wishes for you. It's not, may sound a little cold, but it's really true. We can do all we can to support people, those we love, and it's wise and helpful to do that and kind to do that. But ultimately, their happiness depends on their choices and their actions. Again, T.S. Eliot says, teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. And I understand that as caring, meaning, having our hearts open, doing everything we can, and the not caring being more not clinging to outcomes. So holding that caring without it turning into a controlling kind of caring, of relationship. So I just want to finish up by saying, as I read the journey, I read it really as a poem about waking up, realizing that the life we're living, the habits that we're repeating, the actions we're taking aren't leading us to where we want to go and where we need to go, and that we need to embark in a new direction, a new path, a new life. It may not necessarily be physically moving out of a relationship, but certainly changing the way we engage, the way we relate with others, in our relationships and in our lives. It's also a poem about letting go of old patterns, letting go of old ways, relationships that aren't serving us. It's also very realistic about the obstacles that we'll meet, that change isn't easy, that we will meet difficulties and barriers on the path. And it's about clear intention, about resolution, determination, and effort, and about trusting that inner voice that knows what leads to freedom and what leads away from suffering. And it's a poem of trusting in ourselves, that inner voice is trustworthy, that it will take us in the direction we need to go. And the poem ultimately isn't a poem, it's a poem about the journey, about that going on the journey. It's not so much a poem, it's not really a poem about enlightenment itself, like the Buddha and his enlightenment saying, done is what needed to be done. The house builder, you will never build the house again. Your rafters have been broken, your ridgepole shattered. My mind has attained to unconditional freedom. That's the kind of the Buddha's poem of awakening. Mary Oliver's poem isn't that, but it's about going in that direction. It's about embarking on a path to freedom, entering, if you like, a stream or a river that takes us to greater happiness and freedom. It's really about living an authentic life, taking refuge in our own capacity for awakening, taking refuge in the truth, in reality, rather than wishful thinking or habits or conditioning. And it's taking refuge in community, coming back into our lives. So just take a here. If this is helpful, just kind of reflecting for a minute. Does this, the poem, does it speak to you in your own life about challenges, difficulties, maybe things that need to change, qualities that you might cultivate in yourself, perseverance, effort, determination, cultivating wise intention, really cultivating courage, the courage to meet our experience wholeheartedly. So thank you for your kind attention. And we'll move now to some mindful movement, get into our bodies. And thank you, Kirsten, for leading us in the movement. Thank you all.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much.
Share a little bit, something somebody shared with me a few years ago. I remember it was before the pandemic. It was something we were doing in person, a class or a workshop or a retreat, and I quoted some of Mary Oliver's poems, shared some of her poems, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said she had gone to an event for Mary Oliver. This must have been in the last few years of Mary Oliver's life, and she was still doing some public events. And I think a book signing, and she went up and get her book signed, and she shared with Mary Oliver that her poems were kind of that in a way she was kind of the poet laureate of meditation teachers and yoga teachers. I think lots of teachers loved her poems, and they shared them in their meditations and talks and stuff. And the person shared with me that Mary Oliver was really pleased to hear this. She hadn't known this, and she was, if in UK English, you say she was chuffed. She was chuffed. She was very, very pleased and happy to hear that her poems were being used as, kind of spiritual teaching. So, or just to help people kind of connect and be present and all of that. Because so many of her poems, I mean, in a way, I think they're all really poetry about presence, even if they're just kind of, her walking in the woods and observing the, plants or the animals or whatever. It's just very much about being really fully present and putting that in language. And it's such a wonderful gift. And some of them are as with the journey and maybe the summer day and her poem about death and quite a few others, they're really kind of teachings in themselves, and that's what this kind of spirit I wanted to share the talk today in, as the richness of that particular poem and how it relates, at least for me, to the Buddha's teachings. I think what we'll do today is, if folks have things to share or questions, we'll do that. We'll do that once we close the formal session. Maybe what we'll do is we'll see if one person, one person has something that feel like you'd like to share before we have a few announcements, and then we formally close the session, and then we'll continue afterwards if people want to stay a little bit longer. So anyone have something, and we'll just do the first person if there is anybody. Francine, yes. You just unmute yourself and.
No, I don't have a question. Actually,
I thought I saw your hand raised. Sorry about that. Let's see. Thank you, Angie. Terry says, can you say more about eating the menu metaphor? This was sent directly to me. I hope it's okay to share it. In the same way as I was talking about teachings are only ever pointing at something. They're really pointing ourselves inward. Like if there's teachings about suffering, let's say the Buddha's teachings of the Four Noble Truths, I think they're extraordinarily powerful teachings. For me, the Four Noble Truths give me a key to unlocking the suffering in my life, to kind of seeing where I'm stuck. And okay, if I feel like I'm in a place of being stuck, then I say, okay, what am I doing? What's my role in this suffering? What am I believing? What am I doing or not doing that's keeping me hooked in this relationship of suffering? That is a really powerful teaching, but it only really becomes freeing once we apply it in our practice and in our lives. If we understand it, it's like, oh, that's helpful. Oh, yeah, that's helpful. But it's only when we actually experience it in our own life that's where the transformation happens. So the menu, being a metaphor for teachings, can only ever point to the meal. The menu cannot be satisfying in itself, unless it's made of, bread or something, putting that aside, where you can, once you've read the menu, please eat it. You could do that, but typically the menu is made of paper or cardboard or something. Anyway, so that's I hope that's helpful. Terry, thank you. Francine, you can find the talks in different places. You can find them on YouTube, because IMCW uploads the talks to YouTube. You can find them on the IMCW website. If you go, you should be able to go to my page on the IMCW website. I have a lot of talks and meditations on Insight Timer on the app. And I asked Karen, if you could share, I'm going to actually share a couple of things coming up, and then included there, on July 29th, Rebecca and I are teaching a day-long retreat. I mentioned a little at the beginning, but that's in Tenley Town. Check that out. There's a link there, and you'll find all the information and registration for that. I'm also doing a 6-week course, which I'm very excited about. It's really bringing together 3 of the main areas of Buddhist teachings: the Four Noble Truths, the foundations of mindfulness, and the heart practices. Those three areas, and I'm kind of trying to. I will be pulling them all together as kind of. As a course on the core teachings of the Buddha. So check that out. There's a link there to that. And I also, Karen also put a link to a talk, which is not the same talk as I just gave, but it was kind of more on the metaphors of the journey and the path. And I was talking somewhat more in that talk about my own experiences and my own journey rather than focusing. I think I used the poem, but only as an introduction, the journey poem. So check those out if it's helpful. Also, we share each week that these teachings are freely offered. There's no cost to coming along to these classes. So everyone is welcome. You're invited, if you're able and if you're inclined to do so, to make a donation. And the donation goes to support the teacher. A small amount goes to IMCW's admin, and organizational costs, but the majority goes to the teacher. And Karen has shared how to send different ways through Venmo and PayPal and Zelle, and through old-fashioned ways that you can make donations. And this is how the teachings have come down through 2,500 years to today. And it's a tradition of dana, D-A-N-A, of generosity that we're committed to continuing.